Welcome. Welcome back. The button is green and it's not coming out the speaker. Okay, I'm going to talk really loud. And Zoom folks, would you put in the chat if you cannot hear me? For those of you who I haven't seen before, welcome to Climate Conversations. This is a set of 6 conversations about climate change from very perspective. About your sponsor, besides OCAMIC, and your sponsor is the CLIO Institute, for whom I work. CLIO stands for Climate Leadership Engagement Opportunities, and my mission in life is to have people who experience one of these 4 things.
We can't hear you now.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Is that better? Thank you very much, Pam. Thank you, Barb. I recognize your voice. Hello. Climate Leadership Engagement Opportunities, and my mission on Earth for this 3rd act of my life is to help people engage with climate conversations wherever you are and however is comfortable for you to do. So I want very much for you to take whatever you learn today, whatever surprises you, startles you, scares you, pleases you, and talk about it to 3 other people between now and next week. I also want to tell you why it matters. We know that 72% of Americans acknowledge climate change is real. 67% of Americans, and this is red, white, blue, black, green, old, young, east, west, 67% acknowledge that it's human caused. 37% talk about it. How can we fix a problem if we don't acknowledge that it exists? And so that is the challenge that I'm handing you to take on here. Now, what can you do? That's why it matters. It matters that you do this, that you talk about it, so you can make a difference and raise that 37% up to maybe 40%. Okay, thank you. I see the heads nodding. Appreciate that. What can you do? Talk about it, obviously. Hey, Larry, good to see you. Also, I'm going to circulate post-class the Right to Clean Water petition and the amendment so you can read it. And poor Pam is going to get another set of please send to my class that form. You can either mail it yourselves or bring it next week. That's number 1 thing you can do. The number 2 thing you can do, and nobody did this week, I'm wrong, there it is. We're working on, we have, your Rebecca Snowden is working on a system for collecting your flimsy plastics. So we will stay tuned. We've got a little committee going, very exciting. This is how you can recycle the plastics that are unrecyclable with the county. And I will also ask Pam to send out the 10 things you can do about climate change handout, which we circulated last week. We have some faces here this week. So with that said, it is an extraordinary pleasure to welcome an extraordinary, soft-spoken, humble, no kidding, professor from the University of Florida, Dr. Gail Hansen to Chapman. Her topic is everything you need to know you can learn from plants, and she is absolutely spot on with how plants help with climate change mitigation. You know that she's an associate professor in the Department of Ornamental Horticulture. She specializes in landscape design. She's got quite a resume. You can look her up and be impressed. I think a couple of fun facts about Dr. Hansen that I learned over lunch. She grew up without a television, like no television. Not television when she was 10 years old, no television. And she grew up in a forest, which kind of explains everything, right? The other interesting fact, which some of you may or may not know, is she's actually working with OCAMIC on landscape. And so you got some, you're really lucky. So I'm going to shut up now and turn the mic over to Dr. Hansen. And thank you so much for adding us to your schedule.
Please
Well, thank
increase the volume for Zoomers. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay? Is there any way
It's
to
a
increase
little
the volume
low.
on this? Probably not. I don't think I can do it by the microphone. So
It's still too low.
online. So I don't know if there's anything I can do for you guys online. Everyone in the room can hear me fine, and I'm pretty used to yelling at students, so I can talk pretty loud. Well, you guys, you remind me of my students. Nobody wants to sit in the front row. Actually, in my classes, the students are in the studio, so I don't have to worry about them being, arranged like this. But I do have to sometimes get them to move up and sit in the front row to participate. So I'm going to, a little bit more about me. I teach the residential landscape design classes at UF in the environmental horticulture department. I'm actually a professor, full professor. I graduated from associate professor about 5 years ago, and I haven't updated my CV yet. No, it's my fault. Yeah, I know. I gotta fix that. But anyway, and I have my degrees in landscape architecture. So I'm also an affiliate professor in the landscape architecture department. And I worked for about 10 years here in Gainesville in a private landscape architecture firm. And so I have done many, many, many landscapes. And I'm going to try to draw on my experience in designing these landscapes. I'm also working with Okamic for their landscape, and we're moving forward with that. So today when I got this title, everything you need to know you can learn from plants. That was the title I was first given. I thought, well, that's quite a stretch there. I'm not sure if I can learn, everything I need to know. So I inserted climate change because this series is about climate change. And so I'm going to be directing my focus on plants and climate change. Some things are very positive and encouraging. Other things are not so positive and a little discouraging. So we'll be talking about different issues. I put this particular photo up here because obviously it's in South Florida, not a landscape you would see around here. But it is probably one of the residential landscapes that is going to be most vulnerable to climate change because it's on the water. And so, with sea level rise and saltwater intrusion and everything, these types of landscapes are maybe going to be in trouble. The other thing that I want to talk about a little bit is I'm going to be talking and focusing, because it's in my wheelhouse, urban plants, not natural area plants, not, out in the forest, not wildland plants. I'm going to focus on urban plants. And one of the reasons for that is because I actually spent a good deal of time writing a book. Here's the book, and you can order it on Amazon. And I'll talk a little bit more about it later on at the end of this talk, but writing a book about urban ecology. And the ecology of green spaces in cities is much different than the ecology of natural areas. And so we need to stay in that lane and just focus on the urban plants. In natural areas, the plant communities come together just based on how adaptable plants are and self-selection. Like, we're not going out there moving plants around and doing anything. It happens organically and naturally. But in urban areas, it's very different. The way our plants come together into these yards, landscapes, which we call plant communities, or probably a better way to describe it is a plant collection, because that's really what it is, just a collection of plants. The way that they come together is by people's visual preferences. We just go out and pick plants we think look pretty.
Social norms drive that. Plant availability, whatever plants we can buy at our local nursery or the big box store has a lot to do with the plants we use. And all the ordinances and policies that we have to follow, like HOA, landscape covenants and codes. How many of you have lived in an HOA before? Oh, so quite a few of you. Were you aware when you moved there that there was going to be codes you were going to have to follow for your landscape? Usually not the ones that you really want to follow, but a lot of policies and ordinances drive that. There are also much different plant challenges in the urban sphere. One of them is the urban heat island. You've all heard of that probably. It's a lot hotter in urban areas because of the hard surfaces. Urban soil, which technically our soil scientists refuse to call soil in urban areas. It's technically dirt. That's because it's just got all sorts of junk in it. Sealed surfaces, which means there's a lot of concrete, a lot of asphalt, a lot of roof, hard surfaces. A lot of air pollution is another issue the plants have to kind of deal with. And we don't have a lot of space for plants in cities. The other problem is in the urban environment, plants need a lot of help. They require very intensive management and maintenance, which obviously doesn't even happen out in natural areas. Diversity of plant material is driven more by socioeconomics, like social status, income, and cultural expectations. So that's another thing that has no bearing on plants out in natural areas. And the other thing is cities are really complex. So we have to look at the social side in addition to the ecological side. So in urban residential landscapes, we don't know a whole lot. In fact, these yards that we have, they're the least studied and the least understood ecosystem. And in fact, most ecologists refuse to even call it an ecosystem. They say, hey, it's just a collection of plants. It doesn't necessarily operate like an ecosystem does. But we know very little about these landscapes. But they make up about 35% of the green space in the city. They're small, but when you put them all together, it's a lot of land. And the complicating factor here is that every one of these small little yards has somebody else taking care of it. So, we need homeowners to be good stewards of the land. And so there's a million different people with all different management styles taking care of these plants. The other thing about urban landscapes, it's really focused on aesthetics. I have designed hundreds of yards, and I have never once had a client say, I would like to have an ugly yard. They are first on the list. I want to have a really beautiful landscape, but I want it to be super low maintenance. Okay, we got a little conundrum there right off the bat when they say that. Okay, some of the risks from climate change are, and these I picked more specifically for the urban environment. So we have drought. We're already experiencing some of that. Sea level rise with the saltwater intrusion. Florida is going to be ground zero in the United States for climate change with these sea level rise and so forth. In South Florida, they experience floods frequently. That picture I took when I was at the Fairchild Botanical Garden, we were inside in a conference. It rained for an hour while we were talking. We went outside and the parking lot was flooded. Just in an hour of rain. High temperatures. That picture there is from Perth. I did some work, studied in Perth for a while in Australia. High temperatures, severe storms. We've got hurricanes. That's Mexico City Beach there, a picture shortly after Hurricane Michael came through. All that was left was a bunch of concrete slabs. And then coastal erosion is going to be a problem. That picture there is not from Florida. That was actually a picture I took when I was in Italy, in Salerno, Italy. That's what they're doing already right now to protect their shoreline. Pardon me? Oh, yeah. Yeah, fire. Did I not talk about that last one? Oh, fire is not so much a problem here, but as you know, there's a fire raging in California right now. All of my family live in California. I grew up there. I evacuated from forest fires several times. It's very scary. So the picture that I had up there was of my brother's house. They're building it right now. They're building it out of concrete. The walls are solid concrete to make it fireproof. So an issue. So on this coastal erosion, what they're doing is they're putting these big, almost looks like, you know, if you ever played the game of jacks, these are big concrete ones. And they just stack them up there. We are not at that point yet, but we might be someday. We might have a bunch of these concrete jacks just scattered all over our coastline. So Florida has another first. It's not a first that we want to have. It's not good. We have the first local extinction in the United States of a plant due to sea level rise. Unfortunate for Florida, but this is the Key Largo tree cactus, and it's down in the Keys, in the very end of the Keys. And this tree in, let me see, I'm looking up here, can't remember my dates here. In 1992, they had discovered 150 of these on this particular island. And by 2021, there were only 6 small fragments of this plant left. And it was destroyed by saltwater intrusion, soil depletion because of the many hurricanes, being eaten by mammals, and king tides. This is just the first plant that this is going to happen to, because all those other things are going to happen along our coastline, and other plants are going to fall by the wayside for the same reason. So let's talk a little bit about these, in Florida, we usually divide up our state into the terrestrial, which is the center of the state, and the coastal, all around the edge of it. So our terrestrial ecosystems are going to be kind of beat up by climate change. A couple of things that are going to happen is a longer growing season. So that's already happening, actually, because we have shorter time periods where we have cold weather. And so I put a couple of other things in here. I don't know if this, oh, it does work. So you see this big caterpillar here? It's the hickory horned devil caterpillar. Have any of you ever seen this here? Oh, okay. Okay, we're talking about the big green caterpillar up in the upper left-hand corner. And it's about the size of a hot dog. I took a picture of this one in my driveway not too long ago. First time I had ever seen it. A little alarming. It's an absolutely gorgeous insect, though. It has like a hard shell on it. And I put this in here just as a reminder that with climate change, we're going to have increased pest damage. A lot more different bugs and more bugs, insects, are going to be here in this state attacking our plants. They're going to find the conditions favorable for them. We also have high drought stress. We've already experienced that a lot of times here, and it's going to get worse. And even the native plants are going to be under stress. So the pictures up in the top, they show in the middle, that's a research plot that I have where we planted all native plants. This was about 3 months of irrigation to get them established. We turned off the irrigation, and about 3 months later, same plot, this is what it looked like with no irrigation because it got hot and we didn't have any rain in the next 3 months. And so it deteriorated pretty badly. It recovered though when it started raining again. We are not turning on the irrigation because it's native plants, and we're trying to see how native plants are going to do here. So we're not going to turn on the irrigation unless everything goes totally downhill and we panic and say we got to put water on them. Here in the bottom left, we have an urban forest that may be unsuitable for wildlife. Now, I know a lot of you probably think squirrels, big deal. There's a ton of them out there. But these were 2 squirrels that were hanging out on a branch in a tree in my yard. And so I actually like to watch squirrels. Another problem that we're going to have is non-native invasive plants are going to spread. And the reason why is invasive plants can live anywhere there. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But this is a picture of a project I'm working on up in Yulee. And that's torpedo grass growing up through a shrub in their yard. Everybody in this development has torpedo grass. And we think it came in when they brought in a lot of fill dirt and they brought the torpedo grass with them. And so now it has invaded everybody's yard and it's a nightmare to take care of it. Trying to get rid of it. And then high heat, changing fire patterns. And that's what I was talking about. This is my brother's house. It's almost done now, but a long time ago, the concrete walls. You can see here in the background the Sierra Nevada mountain range. They're in Placerville in the foothills. And you can see it's mandated that you clear a huge area around your house for fire protection. Now, we also have the coastal ecosystems, and they're urban because all of our cities are on the coast. And so we have habitat loss from wave action is going to start destroying the dunes and the dune grass. Fortunately, here the USDA has a document on how to restore those. The picture in the middle is a storm surge that's in Perth. It's right on the ocean, and as a big storm came in, and you can see it breached the seawall completely, just came over the seawall. So that's an issue with these storm surges, increased salt in the soil, and then also the sea level rise. And we know that that's already happening with king tides in Miami, and this one happens to be in Alabama. I think it was in the Gulf Shores, Alabama, a king tide and a storm. So, yeah, great. A lot of fun things to look forward to with climate change. So, here's the thing about landscapes in urban areas. They're called novel landscapes, which means that they're new and they have no natural analog. There are no landscapes in nature like these novel landscapes. And the reason for that is because these landscapes are made by man, for man, by people, for people, because people are the dominant element in the urban environment. So we have to meet their needs first. And then once we do, then we can move on and look at needs of wildlife and other issues with the landscape. But it's a totally man-made plant community. And again, ecologists are kind of like, yeah, I don't know if you can call that a plant community. It's just a collection of plants. So it's totally new species put in a combination. So we have, it's not like any of the species in natural areas that grow together. There could be native plants in there. There could be adapted plants, which some people call near native. It could even have invasive plants. And then, of course, just your ornamental plants. Could be a combination of all those. If we use more native plants and adaptive plants, it could possibly be a more ecological landscape, maybe. We can actually, though, use this idea of a landscape that we create for positive change. It's called positive disturbance. And I put these two pictures in because it illustrates that. So the picture on the left here is a stormwater basin in a parking lot in Portland, Oregon. It was designed by somebody and planted there, and it works. It collects water, it filters water, it cleans the water, and it prevents flooding. So that's a positive disturbance. That landscape, even though those plants probably don't appear together out in the wild, they're working okay here. And the other one, interestingly enough, is a man-made wetland. You wouldn't find a wetland like that out in the forest, would you? Like, you know, what wetland has terraces and block walls and a pool and a tower? But it works because the water flows down these terraces through all this plant material, and what it gets down here, it's clean water and it supports wildlife. There's fish and all sorts of amphibians and whatnot growing in there. And so it has ecosystem function and possibly some ecosystem services when you think about it. Totally man-made, but they work. So here's a couple other things to remember about novel communities. They are human landscapes. They're new combinations of plants and probably a more abundant diversity of plants, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're biodiverse. Just because you have a lot of plants and a lot of different species, all those species may have kind of the same ecosystem services. They may support all the same insects and so forth. And so they're not truly biodiverse. You have to look at the traits of each of the plants and have a good combination of different traits before you can call it biodiverse. So, and they might have non-native plants, they usually do, and invasive species actually in them. Why invasive? Because a lot of nurseries still sell invasive plants. And so they end up in our landscapes. This is a stormwater on the left, is a stormwater basin right here in Gainesville. I guess they didn't get the memo that you're supposed to put native plants around stormwater ponds, because we see here the red fountain grass, definitely not native, and plumbago, that's not native, and thyralis back there. None of those are native. But there is a code here in Gainesville that you have to use native plants around stormwater ponds. Don't know how they got away with that one. The other picture is just a picture of a natural playground in Perth. And it's an interesting landscape, but if you look at it carefully, you can tell it was primarily built for the kids to play there. And then the plants are kind of secondary on that landscape. So here's something that's really challenging about climate change is that it's really hard to assess whether a landscape is going to do well with climate change because there's so many uncertainties about climate change. So we don't know the extent and the spread of some of these climate change issues. We're all very familiar with these heat maps and the precipitation or water rainfall maps here. Those are models. They're predictions of what's going to happen. What's kind of funny about this one map is apparently our rainfall is not going to change. It's like 0 right here, % of change. But boy, the people up in the Northeast and up in the Northwest, apparently they're going to get a lot more water and a lot more rain. That's what the model is predicting. But so, you know, we have to rely on models because we don't know. We don't know how able these different plants are going to, and habitats are going to be able to adapt to new conditions. We just don't know that yet. And we don't know how to assess how vulnerable these plants are going to be to some of these new conditions, like high heat is one that we're really concerned about, because plants, even if plants do very well in sunny areas, it's not the same as high heat, because you can have sunny areas in the middle of winter and it's cool. But if you have continuous high heat, it really stresses plants out. California is experiencing that right now in their agricultural industry. Don't be surprised if all your salad greens cost a lot more in a couple of months. Their fields are being scorched by the high heat. And I'm pretty sure it's going to come out. We're going to be paying more. Also, we don't know if we should help plants like this assisted species migration. Should we start planting plants farther north with the anticipation that it's going to get hotter up there? And hopefully, you know, they'll survive while it, you know, gets hotter and hotter. And also the butterfly effect. So obviously climate change is going to affect plants, but if it affects plants, it's going to affect all the insects that rely on the plants, and it's just that, you know, ongoing effect. Species are going to be forced to adapt. There's no question about that. The other thing is, we don't know in urban areas anyway how to measure how vulnerable these habitats are. So this is what they use out in natural areas. And we're just trying to use it in urban areas. We're not sure how successful we are being with it. But in natural areas, they look at sensitivity, and that's the degree to which a species or the habitat is going to be affected by climate change. And then they're also looking at the adaptive capacity. How well can those plants adapt? They put those two together and they get a resilience score. And they say, okay, this habitat and these plants are either really low on resilience or really high. But then they also look at when they get exposed to high heat, a lot of water, whatever it is, are they going to be very vulnerable? And so an example here is this matrix. And if it's yellow here, then it has a very high vulnerability. It won't do well. And that's because the resilience is really low, but the exposure is really high. So here, you know, that plant community is probably not going to do well. Up here, these darker colors, that means it's probably going to do pretty good because the resilience is high, but the exposure is low. And a combination of those two, the plant's probably going to do okay. This was developed on natural areas. We're going to try and use it on urban areas. I don't know. You know, like I said, it's understudied. We're working on it. So here's the problem, too, is that all the climate scientists say that the coastal ecosystems are going to get the brunt of it. They are going to suffer the most. And so what are we doing here in Florida to protect our coastal ecosystems? Thinking about seawalls, but, you know, it's a $1 billion problem, or billions of dollar problem, which is kind of why it's hard for anybody to take up the cause and start to actually even think about what we need to do. But this, the Florida Climate Institute is telling us it's going to be a problem. They say when they surveyed these coastal areas, of the 1,200 species that they looked at, 25% of them are going to lose their current habitat. So they're not going to be able to, they're not going to have a place to live, basically. They also say when they looked at 236 of these coastal species, 76% cannot relocate inland because the conditions for their growth are not inland. They're on the coast. So there you go. You're going to lose a lot of plants that way. Habitat loss is going to be the leading cause of plant extinction here. And invasive species, unfortunately, are going to do better than our adapted plants and our landscape plants and our native species. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but the native species are the most vulnerable. because there's going to be a lot of new pathogens, diseases, bugs that are going to come in rapidly, and the native plants have no defense against those. And, you know, plants just can't jump up and run away, you know, and move on their own. They're totally dependent on us. So they're not going to be able to outrun, and we're not going to be able to move them fast enough. And then, you know, this whole idea of migration and adaptation doesn't work as well in urban areas because we've modified the landscape so much. So we can't rely on plants adapting. So what makes a particular plant vulnerable to climate change, meaning that they are not very resilient at all? One of them is a lot of plants, and I put these 4 are all from South Florida, and they are native plants, and they're probably not going to do well because they have specialized habitat requirements, and there's not a bunch of habitats that they can be in. They have very narrow tolerance for certain environmental, like temperature zone. They can't handle lower temperatures, but they also can't handle higher temperatures. Very narrow zone that they do well in. They're not going to get the usual environmental triggers that they have for bloom time, for you know, seed, to set seed, and so forth. They are very dependent on, especially native plants, interaction between species. And so if you're separating them and you're not moving the whole ecosystem, that could be bad. And they just can't disperse quickly and move out and get away from, you know, issues with climate. So this is a picture of a typical landscape down in South Florida, obviously. And when we talk about urban vegetation, we know that it's novel. It's not a true ecosystem. We use both cultivated plants and native plants. We also have a lot of SUPs in our yard. You may have never heard of the term SUPs. It's a spontaneous urban plant, otherwise known as a weed. But it's official. It's a SUP. We probably have invasive plants in our yards. A lot of people do because we can buy them at the nurseries. And we look toward these plants to actually fulfill a lot of our social needs. We look for the social benefits to make our communities more livable, our neighborhoods, you know, our communities, our cities more livable, to create a sense of place so that you go out and you know you're in North Florida or South Florida just based on the plant material. Public health is becoming an issue. We all know that a lot of mental health issues going on now, and we know nature is very helpful. It's very helpful to go out in nature and see nature. And then the other thing is about these landscapes, it's maintenance. And that's where a lot of times we're not very good at doing that. Our maintenance routines that we use are usually not super great for the environment. So I was looking at this picture, and you can see that there is actually native plants. So here we have the Kunti down in the corner here. Then you see a whole bunch of ornamental plants. We got bromeliads, crotons. This looks like some pentas here, maybe some flax lily. And there might even be a couple of invasive plants in here. There's some ferns back here. I can't tell. It might be asparagus fern, which is invasive. If it's foxtail fern, you're still okay, which is good because I have a lot of foxtail fern in my yard. Okay, so in the urban environment, when you use native plants, this is going to be the problem. Native plants are highly vulnerable and more susceptible to extinction from climate change. So that kind of, and the reason why is there's small population sizes throughout the state. We don't have huge areas of native plants. throughout the state. They have more specialized stages in their life that climate change is going to interrupt, especially less tolerant of severe heat, that more likely to suffer from the pathogens that, people say, that scientists who study this say we're going to be invaded by those. And they usually do better as an ecosystem. And we don't plant them as an ecosystem in our yards. So if they're going to be more susceptible to extinction, should we rethink planting a lot of native plants in our yards? I think we should keep planting them, and we should plant even more of them so that we don't have these small population sizes. Let's start helping native plants by increasing the number of plants and get that population up. And hopefully that'll help them survive some of these, issues with climate change. A lot of people have issues with a native plant landscape because they think it looks weedy or messy. It doesn't have to look that way. You can plant a lot of native plants and plant them in a very traditional form in plant beds, and they'll look just fine. That's a problem that we also have with Florida-friendly landscaping, is when I talk to people about Florida-friendly landscapes, the first thing they say is, well, what does it look like? Because they're not on board until they know what their yard is going to look like. So I have to go to great lengths to explain it looks like a normal landscape. It just has plants that do well in the area. Right plant, right place. So now we have, and these are different categories of plants that we use in our yard. So now we have the adapted plants. These are plants that people argue about whether it's actually a native plant or not, because they've been in Florida for so long that some people actually are inclined to say, well, it's a native. And so in the urban environment, mostly that's trees. In fact, most of the trees that you can buy at the nursery are native trees, which is a good thing. We have an abundance of native plants at like Marshall Tree Farm and so forth. So I think actually trees are going to be the plant that is going to save us from a lot of these climate change issues. And we need to plant trees and more trees and more trees. They are not at risk of extinction like maybe some of the other plants, like some of the native, flowering plants and so forth. But they can be vulnerable to heat stress. And actually, assisted migration is happening in a lot of cities. They are starting to plant in their cities trees that normally you see south of their city. They're bringing them in anticipation of their city getting hotter over time, and that hopefully their urban forest will be a little bit more heat tolerant. They're also doing these in forests, just planting more trees in forests, hoping that that forest is going to be a little bit more resilient. But the thing is, you can plant a lot of native trees, but you should also plant some of the other trees because you need, again, diversity of your species. Because more trees that are different trees, the more insects they can support and so forth. And some people are actually kind of excited when I talk to them. They say, well, I'm kind of glad it's going to get warmer in Gainesville because I really like all the plants in South Florida. And I want to grow more citrus trees and, more vegetables and stuff. So we were talking about when I first moved to Florida about 35 years ago, I was actually kind of disappointed because I thought it was going to be more tropical. And so I'm driving with my husband through Gainesville and looking around, and I go, these are all the same plants we can grow in Sacramento, in California. It doesn't look very tropical to me. I'm like, darn, I was looking forward to growing more tropical plants. But anyway, so there's apparently a lot of other people in Gainesville thinking the same thing. That's kind of good. I can grow more tropical plants. So then there's the good old ornamental horticulture plants. These are all the plants that you go to Lowe's or Home Depot, you can buy there. They are developed by plant breeders, and we have many different cultivars of them. I have in my department Dave Clark. He does the coleus. I think he has over 200 different varieties of coleus that he has patents on. Another faculty member in our department does caladiums. And once they figure out the genetic sequence to patent and do different varieties of plants, they just take off and just cranking out different varieties of plants. But here's the thing about these ornamental plants. All those plants that you can find in our nurseries and so forth, they have the potential to become invasive if the conditions change. So right now, called sleepers. They're ornamental plants. They're limited by the climate conditions. They're not going to start growing and, stretching out and spreading. But if those conditions change, they may, ecologists say, wake up. And if the conditions suit them better, they'll start growing more and become invasive possibly. So they all have the potential to do that. So that is propagual pressure that causes that. So one of the things that people are kind of excited about, I find here when we're working with them, is that they're finding a wider array of ornamental plants in Lowe's and Home Depot and our nurseries. Unfortunately, our biggest nursery here was San Flasco Nursery out on Millhopper Road for years. 80 acres of plants. It was great. That's where we used to shop for our plants, for our projects. They closed like 10 years ago to grow marijuana. So we don't have a really good nursery here in Gainesville, in my opinion. So let's see. But when you go to the nurseries, they have a wider array of ornamentals, and people are excited about that. Not like there's not enough plants to choose from already. And actually, when plant breeders work on these cultivars, they are looking at making them more resistant to diseases and pests and warmer weather. So another reason why they may do better than your native plants in this climate change. And then, of course, there's the invasive plants. There's a picture of 4 of them. I think all 4 of these are still available in the nurseries. Let's see, I think there's the Japanese honeysuckle, the cassia, Christmas cassia, up in the corner here, the yellow flowered ones. The woodillia, I don't think too many people sell that anymore. And then the mimosa tree. Invasive plants, but they're all still available. So invasive plants are probably going to do really well in climate change because they're so versatile. That's why they're invasive. They can grow anywhere. They can adapt to a lot of different environments, especially places where the growing conditions are really poor. They grow faster. They tolerate more dry conditions. They spread more rapidly, usually because they produce a lot more seeds or fruit. And their seeds usually germinate earlier, so they get a jump on the other plants. They don't have any natural enemies or predators usually, and they can thrive in just about any soil, and they especially like bad soil, disturbed areas. And, the urban heat island actually creates good environment for them, favorable conditions. Warmer in the winter because of the re-radiating the heat from the buildings. The soil tends to be very dry and very warm under all the hardscape and hard surfaces, and they don't have as much competition in the city. So these invasive plants, they're actually very well suited for climate change. It's a little scary. And then there's the sups. The weeds, and they're spontaneous urban plants. And it's really interesting, this company in New York, the Future Green Studio in New York, went around New York, and they're trying to promote bringing attention to these weeds and And by the way, these weeds could be invasive, they could be ornamental, they could be native, they could be any one of the other categories. They just happen to do really well in urban areas. And they're trying to bring attention to these plants and saying, hey, maybe we should grow some more of these. They're so hardy, they can, grow right in the crack of a sidewalk here. So what they did was they went around New York and they sprayed yellow circles around a bunch of these plants. And they put little cards there to tell what the plant is. And then they also did a book. And here's the SUP book, Weeds in New York, or New York City. And it's a botanical book. They did these very beautiful botanical drawings of these weeds and, a description of them, and said, let's use them more. Usually people don't like weeds because they think they lack aesthetic quality. But actually, when you look at them, some of them are pretty nice looking. They just happen to be where you don't want them to be. And that's why it's a weed. That's the dictionary definition of a weed. But it's not a botanical term, for describing a weed. So they have, and the reason why they're so successful is just like the invasive plants. Abundant seed production. They can stay in the ground for anywhere, from 1 to 2 to 3 years to 2 decades. The seeds can just be dormant there, and if you come and you dig up the soil, whoa, you got weeds. And they establish very quickly and they spread rapidly. But like I said, they could be any one of those other categories of plants. But now when you're walking around with someone and you see a weed, hey, there's a SUP. And they will have no idea what you're talking about. So I wanted to show you this. This is an artist, an extraordinary artist who does these huge, huge murals on the sides of buildings. Just to show you how big these are, this building here is 20 stories tall. This one, I think it's about 10 stories, and this one, I think it was 12 or 13 stories tall. She goes around the world. This one is in Switzerland, this one in France, and this one in Taiwan. And she paints these huge murals of weeds. She's calling attention to the fact that they're actually beautiful plants. And obviously, very talented artist and amazing. That's one of on my bucket list, to go somewhere where she has painted one of these and actually see it in person. And a very nice success story with this is in Brazil, I think it was in the capital, they were going to take out a park and build a freeway through the park area. So she came down and she painted a mural. It's very similar to this one here on a building there. And it drew so much attention, and so many people came to take pictures of it and see it and just marvel at it, that it started a movement to protest against removing the park and putting the freeway in, and they actually got the freeway stopped. And it's still a park. So, the power of the message that she was sending. You can go to her website, monakaran.com, and you can see all sorts of others. She's done many, many of these, and they're all on her website. Celebrating weeds. So I want to tell you a little bit about, I'm trying to see how much time I have here. About 6 minutes. Okay, I think I can finish up. And I'll zip through this. I just wanted to let you know that there is this document. It was UC Davis, one of our rival campuses that we have on campus, or that we have here. We're always trying to outdo them in IFAS. They always seem to beat us, though. But anyway, they have a new vision for their campus, and it's really an incredible document that they have written. It's their landscape adaptation plan, and they want to transform their landscape into this enduring, climate-ready landscape, and they're already working on it. We aren't even thinking about it at UF. Climate change, part of that's a little bit political. So their values, though, that they're looking at: beauty, comfort, delight, sense of place, identity, belonging. So they have certain values that they're attaching to these landscapes. And also, they want to bring a sense of hope and agency to the young students on the campus and saying it's not a lost cause. Have hope. You have agency. You can make changes. They're talking about environmental justice and social equity all around this conversation of landscapes. The goal is to steward the land into this new climate reality, but at the same time enforce the sense of place and also the ecological value. So they're asking the question, what does a climate-ready landscape look like? Well, here's a climate-ready landscape. It's very close to UC Davis. It's in Sonoma. It's the Sunset Gardens in Sonoma. They designed this landscape to be climate-ready. It's obviously very drought-tolerant. That's what a climate landscape can look like. It can be beautiful. Gives us hope here. So they have programmatic themes like plants, water, and people. And I'm going to just jam through this really quickly. There are challenges and opportunities here. They know there's going to be increased temperature, so they're looking to grow plants or plant plants that can tolerate that increased temperature, especially in California. That's going to be a major issue. Impacts to plants, of course. They have done a study that showed that nearly 50% of the trees on their campus will not survive the additional heat. So they're trying to now go in and plant trees that will survive better. They're kind of excited, though, that it might give them an opportunity to grow more desert species. So there you go. There's some positive. Let me see. Bloom times, flowering times, and seeding times. They're actually a little worried that they're going to be out of sequence for all the migratory birds. And there's a lot in the Central Valley of California and all the insects and so forth there. So also concerned about impacts to public health. Like, do we need to have a lot more trees for more shade? Because it's going to be hotter than heck out here. So what they did is they went and with their tree experts, they looked at all the trees and they found that only 42% of them were definitely or probably suitable for the new warmer climate. 54% of them were not suitable and probably wouldn't live. So that means they have to change at least half of their current urban forest for more suitable trees. And let's see. So their initiatives are to have this thriving tree canopy, enhance biodiversity, and so forth. It's a wonderful document. It is online. You can download it and look at it. I'm the chair of the Lakes Vegetation and Landscaping Committee on campus. We make decisions when they want to cut down trees, whether we're going to let them do it or not. I'm pushing to have UF do a document similar to this. Another document that I thought you might be interested in is one that I wrote with the help of other IFAS experts. It's standards for high-performing landscapes, which means a landscape can perform very well in climate change. So what we did is we looked at things like functional measures. Here, biodiversity, low maintenance, wildlife and conservation, water conservation, and so forth. I think there's 9 functional measures there. And then we said, here's what you can do in design to meet these functional measures. So if you use an appropriate plant palette, you will have all these functional measures here. And you can just go down the list there and see. So that's a matrix that we developed. And then the other thing that we did is we came up with this idea, because we're working with several big developers down south of Lake Nona and up north of Jacksonville. And they have these developments now, typical yards that are only 10 feet deep from the sidewalk to the front of the house, only 10 feet, houses only 5 feet apart. You can look down the road and all the way down the road. So we're telling them, let's do something different. Let's treat that as a long linear park all the way down the road. Let's use the same plants. Let's plant everybody's front yard together and have the same company maintain everybody's front yard. So if you stand and look down, you'll see this very cohesive, nice landscape that stretches the entire length of the road, goes around the corner and back and all up and down all the blocks there. They're actually doing it at this one development in Lake Nona, because they are under a water budget. They're in the Toho Water District. They can only spend so much, use so much water. They're being forced to do it, which is probably the only reason they're doing it. If you want to learn more about landscape performance, you can go to the Landscape Architecture Foundation website and all sorts of documents and case studies there. And then last slide here is just telling you a little bit about this book that we wrote here. It's some authors, Jocelyn Macedo. Dr. Macedo is a planner, urban planner. And so I wrote the chapters that have to do with the ecology and so forth. I was on sabbatical when I did this. She was still working. She was director of the Center for the Built Environment there at Curtin University in Perth. So I wrote the majority of the chapters. I think I wrote 30 out of 36 chapters in the book. But anyway, you can go to Amazon Books, and if you just type in urban ecology in my name, I think it's only $40 or something like that. If you want to learn a little bit more about urban ecology. I have to tell you that because my publisher told us every time we talk about landscapes in front of a group of people, we have to tell them about our book. So there you go. I told you. I did my duty. Anyway, this is just the outline of everything that we considered in the book. Like I said, there's 36 chapters. We use, the base of it is ecology and the environment, but we also look at social issues like environmental history, biophilia, you know, our values, beliefs, and norms, and our ethics around landscapes and nature, social influences, environmental justice, and under cultural, we talk about the legal landscape, HOA codes and ordinances, and meaning and identity and aesthetic preferences. That drives hugely what we do in urban areas, what people prefer aesthetically. And so this was the kind of the outline and how the book was organized. And the last one, I did bring another book that I thought you guys might be interested in. And this is by Sue Reed and Jenny Steibold. I was actually a reviewer for this book, but it's the Climate Wise Landscaping. A really good little book if you want to look up more about what you need to do for climate wise landscapes. Wow. And that's it. I'm done.
Obviously, a huge thank you. I know some of you need to leave, so don't worry about it. Go ahead. But if you've got a few minutes, maybe we could take 3 or 4 questions. And
Sure.
Thank you so much for your talk today. I'm thrilled out of my mind that you're going to be working with Okamic, number one. And secondly, you are the only person I've heard talk about that some trees are not going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're encouraging trees everywhere. And I wonder how many people know what you're bringing out, which is really important.
Yes, I think that people are starting to recognize that more, especially the tree growers. They are starting to think about, you know, is this tree going to be a good tree for the future, mostly heat and drought tolerant. And so they're giving it a lot of consideration in the new species that they're starting to grow, and hopefully that will filter out, and the landscape contracting firms who are planting the new trees and the landscape architects who are doing the design are going to also say, is this tree good for future conditions? I think we need to plant a lot more trees here in Florida, because I'll tell you what, I'm working in these new developments. They clear cut the land. I could not live in one of those new developments. I need trees, and you know, you go in these little sticks out there. Anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Hansen, for a really jam-packed presentation. I had a question about an earlier slide. It's much earlier. It's when you're talking about scenarios for climate change, and there was a graph that talked about rainfall, and you pointed to it and you said, well, you pointed to the South Florida portion of the map and said, well, it's white and there's no change. And so that means that there will be, as far as they know, no change in rainfall in terms of climate change. But when you look north, the percentage of rainfall difference was 10 to 20%.
Right.
And I thought, but doesn't that affect the aquifer if we have less rainfall in the future and it'll be a more drought-friendly climate up here as opposed to South Florida? So I wondered if you wanted to address that.
So when they say percent of change, we're still going to get a lot of rain here. We already get quite a bit of rain during the rainy season, but they're talking about the additional precipitation or rain that we could possibly expect. So if they don't get as much rain up in the Northeast, for example, and they're going to get 20% more, it might be even less than what we're still going to get here in Florida because it's 20% more than what they are getting now.
It's the change.
It's the change. No. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Thanks for that. That's a good clarifying question. Zoom folks, if you've got a question, you can unmute and just holler it out. Any other? Yes, one more question here.
I loved your picture of the sort of natural look yard versus the manicured lawns.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, right here, we are battling a CEO who thinks we should all have a lush green carpet at the front. And we happen to have a large oak tree in the front
Mhm.
that's not going to permit a lush green lawn. He hasn't gotten to our yard yet, but
Well, I am working with OCAMIC and people on a committee, and we are looking at changes to the landscape for the better, we hope.
Yeah,
Bob
okay.
might be able to say more about that.
Gail, would you tell us a little bit about the concept of your plans for landscaping here at OCAMIC and how it incorporates some of the things you talked about today?
So what we're looking at, I actually did a landscape plan for this community way back in 2011. It was a pretty good landscape plan, but the problem was right after we did it and gave it to you guys, you got a new director. So the plan just ended up on the shelf somewhere. There was no moving forward with it. I'm actually kind of glad, though, that nothing was done with it because we weren't considering climate change at that time. I think now we're going to do a much better landscape. And one of the things that we really want to do is, you know how when you go out in your landscape and you have a lot of turf from your parking lot and the sidewalk, a lot of turf, and then you have your traditional foundation plants along the building? We're going to flip that. We're going to move a lot more plant material out toward the parking lot. And one of the reasons for that is we have to leave a green strip of turf for the large equipment, the cherry picker that they need to bring in to clean the building and wash the windows on the building. So we have to leave some space for that equipment to come in. So we're going to move a lot of our plants out. We're going to propose to put a lot more trees in and give you guys a very nice wooded area with a nice pathway going through it and places where you can stop and sit on a bench and enjoy the landscape. Our philosophy here is that that green space out there is not just to look at. We want it to be more functional. We want you to be able to use it. We want you to be able to be in the landscape. We want you to be able to walk your pets. There's on the pathway through it. And we want it to be shady and comfortable, physically comfortable. So on these hot days, you can go out and you can still take a walk out in nature and feel comfortable. Sit on a bench, might even put a little gazebo or two out there for you to sit in. And I think that you'll find that it's a much more pleasant and aesthetic experience as you drive in to see this little forest. And it's not going to be so dense that you can't see through it, but you will see all this greenery. And hopefully it'll bring the scale of these very tall buildings down and they won't feel so massive. Right now, to me, they feel like they were kind of just plunked here in the middle of kind of a natural area. Your drive in is beautiful. It's beautiful, and we want to replicate that a little bit out here in the front of your, we won't have as many plants under the trees, but a lot more trees. And we want to make it a place that's special and functional.
Okay, one more question.
Thank you for your concept explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Couple thoughts. Remember that on the back side of the building, we're a level higher with the apartments. So for instance, we live on the first floor in an apartment, and the backside, that's our yard. And I don't think we're much interested in high trees out there. We're interested in bushes we can look across and see something that looks like a normal yard. In the front, there's parking, you know,
Mhm.
and so you can go up elevation.
Right.
The other thing is, I'm not a dog person, but it sounds like there's a lot less acreage to walk your dog on and let him do his thing.
As far as a lot less turf. So we are only doing the front of your building. We're not doing the back or anything like that, only the front. And I think that you will find that with the pathway that goes through the wooded area, you can walk your dog there. You don't have to walk them on the turf. You will probably be required to pick up a little plastic bag before you walk on the path. Yeah, so you can clean up after your pet, and you can walk on, for example, when I'm thinking about people walking, I think about being able to do loops. So you could start out and walk on the turf, because it'll be a long ribbon of turf in the front. You could walk on the turf all the way down, come back on the pathway that goes through the trees, and turn again and walk back on the sidewalk. So you've got multiple loops that you will be able to walk through.
We have an important question from Larry. Okay.
Regarding the landscaping on the entryways and the roads, there are some forces here that feel that some of the landscaping should be formalized, and it is, with rounded trees and rounded bushes. To me, it's a clash. I was wondering what you think of it visually.
Well, we are going to recommend that almost all of the large, overgrown, overpruned, mature shrubs be taken out, because they're at the end of their life cycle anyway. They're not going to last very much longer. And when you do that pruning, it shortens the life of a plant when you're constantly pruning it. So we're going to have, ornamental plants. We're not going to use all natives. We're going to have, No, well, we're going to take out most of those plants that are over pruned, so it's not going to clash with what we're putting in. So we have been talking with the maintenance people and so forth, and we are going to let them know which plants should not be pruned and should be, you should leave them to grow into the tree form. For example, the laurel petalum that you have out here at your entrance, it's the purple leaf plant. It's a shrub that looks like a tube. It's been trimmed so much. I have that same plant in my yard, and it's a tree. It will grow to tree form. It's about 20 feet high and about 30 feet wide, the canopy. That's how that plant should be. It should not be trimmed.
Okay, I'm going to butt in here. In the interest of another warm thank you for your incredible presentation.
Thank you.
And suggest to the landscape committee that because there's a lot of interest, perhaps Dr. Hansen could come back just for a conversation about what's happening here, talk about planning by committee. As you know, you start out wanting a horse and you end up with a 3-hump camel. But but it's interesting to hear what people want and might be useful. Sorry, Bob, for one more thing for you to do, but there you go. Thank you for your extraordinary attention, Dr. Hansen. Thank you for an extraordinary program. This will be on YouTube, and you may want to suggest as part of your homework for talking to 3 people that people go and watch this program, especially because the concepts here come home to you right here at OCAMIC. So we'll see you all next week. Bring me your plastics, and we'll maybe have a report on how we're going to go about setting up an OCAMIC-wide collection. Thank you.